light that turns on, a path is illuminated.
When you put some installation like in the darkness, everybody there in the family gets excited.
Access to electricity is opportunity. It's the flip of a switch that allows a business to thrive. Relief for a worried mother. The spark that fuels the next big idea. And it's the connection that's needed to plug Africa into the global economy. Power Africa, a U.S. government-led partnership, is creating that connection, doubling access to electricity in Sub-Saharan Africa, using the rich resources of the African sun, wind, streams, lakes, and natural gas, investing in technologies that expand the grid and reach beyond power lines. Thanks to Power Africa, the rushing waters of a river will light a town. Students can count on solar fields to light their path. And the bubbling gas under an African Great Lake fuels the only floating methane extraction plant in the world. Power Africa brings together the greatest innovators, top companies, and countries to spur Africa's energy revolution. With these partnerships, we've mobilized billions of dollars in investment and broken down barriers to speed up power projects. Our work is shining a light on an untapped market, and investors are taking notice. Power Africa will generate 30,000 more megawatts of electricity and electrify another 60 million homes and businesses. It's ambitious but achievable.
There's nothing more exciting than being present when our customers turn on their lights or their TVs.
And by teaching the next generation, Africa will lead its energy future.
If more kids become engineers with the necessary tools, they can transform Africa.
The future is bright. Join us.
Thank you. I'd like to now turn it over to Lyda Fitz, who's one of the original people who helped design Power Africa and who's been working on it since day one.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for that kind introduction. And thank you for all that you're doing to make Power Africa successful. This is the third time I've seen that video. I think I like it better every time. So I really appreciate all of you for joining us. I'm the Regional Director for Sub-Saharan Africa at U.S. Trade and Development Agency. And the title of this presentation, the title of the panel, is Unlocking Clean Energy Investment in Africa. And we're really looking forward to an interactive conversation about both the challenges and the opportunities for investing in renewable power in Africa. You know, to meet the demand and the enabling economic growth is going to require estimated $93 billion every year in new capacity, new transmission, and new distribution. And African governments and Western DFIs cannot meet that alone. It's a high burden. And private sector financing and money has got to come in if we're going to meet those goals. And governments recognize that. I think we're seeing across the continent, governments look to PPP structures that are new and welcome private sector innovation and partners in building out infrastructure, particularly in power. And public and private capital is coming in. I think the low interest rates have helped people willing to take risks and seeking out higher returns. And for that matter, the technology costs that have gone down, commodity costs have gone down, have made a lot of these projects all the more attractive and bankable. But that doesn't mean it's been easy. If you're the first solar project, the first wind project, the first IPP project in a market, it's difficult. The road is unclear. There are a lot of challenges, and it's difficult to ascertain the risk. And at the end of the day, that makes the cost higher for everyone. And makes tariffs higher for the customer. And often a little bit of capital up front, a little bit of guidance at the riskiest and earliest stage of investment is what's required to bring projects and make them bankable and make energy accessible. And that's one place that TDA can step in. Go to the next slide. So TDA is the U.S. government's project preparation agency, and we support feasibility studies, technical assistance, pilot projects, as well as reverse trade missions. We do this on a grant basis with local African developers, as well as their international partners if they're there. And over the last 30 years of our existence, we've supported over 500 projects across the continent. And in recent years, thanks to Power Africa, we've really expanded and expanded our investments in Africa's power sector significantly. As Andy kindly noted, we were one of the original members of Power Africa, and we're very proud to be part of the Power Africa Toolbox. And we're the lead implementer of the U.S. Africa Clean Energy Finance Initiative, under which we really expanded our renewable investments. In fact, a quarter of our portfolio, which is now up to 52 projects across Africa, is in solar. And over the last 3 years, we've actually increased our investment in renewable and gas by over 800%. And certainly part of that is in response to the wanting to support Power Africa, and part of that is really the incredible increase in demand that has come from the private sector. And this is a snapshot of where we've put our money across 52 activities that have go forward, have the potential to create over 1 gigawatt of electricity and 2.1 million connections. So with that, I'd like to talk to some specific examples among those 52 projects and even more. We're very pleased to welcome 3 panelists here all developing solar projects in Africa, and who all have some success we can be proud of. Abed Amran is a board member for the Moroccan Agency for Solar Energy, and a project preparation grant from TDA helped Masson develop the North 3 project, 150 megawatts. It's currently under construction, not too far from here. And Mayank, who joins us on screen from Tanzania, where he is developing a 5-megawatt project in Kigoma for next-gen Solwazi. And finally, Nazir Jama, here from South Africa, where they're developing a CSP project. I've actually already successfully won, and one that TDA is working on the development with. So I wanted to turn first to you, Abed, as really the local and the farthest along in terms of some construction, to talk about the project that you're developing. You're responsible for one of the largest and most ambitious solar projects in the world. So if you could tell us a little bit about that and what it was like to develop it.
So thank you very much. First of all, I want to apologize for my English pronunciation, and just if you allow me some introductory words. This initiative is for Africa is fantastic. We should share some numbers. You should know that in Africa, it's the only place on the planet where the electrification is decreasing. Okay? It's the only place where a household pay for a kilowatt hour much more than you can pay for it in Occidental countries. It's a place where the people that have less than $2 or $3 per day pays $1 billion a year for energy and for electricity, which means that we have a place where we can find a good opportunity to give solution to people, to make them access to knowledge, to health, to help the women, to deliver women and little girls from looking for the wood to make the energy at home, and where we can create also growth opportunity with this renewable energy that can shortcut the access to the energy for people. So thank you for this initiative. It's a very wonderful one. We as Mazen have with the ONE, which is the grid operator, a very good experience in rural electrification. This experience, we are sharing it with some African countries. We are already working with them on it. We try to help them also to organize the renewable energy, their first renewable energy projects, because we believe that with that we can reduce the price of the electricity if we have a large-scale project and a large flow of projects. So I want to introduce these words because I really believe in them, and I am very enthusiastic to your initiative. And if we can be of any help for that, we will be very proud to give you some assistance from us. Okay. So I'm also very proud to say that we collaborate with USCDA. Since the launch of the Moroccan initiative, we have made, I think, 2 or 3 reverse trade missions. It helps us to enlarge our awareness of the technology sector for solar energy in particular. Then we have a very interesting also cooperation with USCDA with regards to a very bright future technology that we are developing right now, which is the tower technology, the solar concentrated tower technology. For that, today, with this assistance, we succeed in identifying the correct requirements that was needed to have a good project. Because as you know, in renewable energy, the first step to success is to understand what you are looking for to optimize your investment. Because the investment in renewable energy is done time zero. You buy all the installation. You don't have gas, you don't have coal to burn. So if you buy a plant or you book a plant that is not completely fit your need, you pay it for 25 years. So first time you should understand what do you want to make the first investment. And in this scope, we succeed with USCDA to have the good understanding of what is needed in not completely mature technology, to understand how to organize our requirements for technical specification. And right now we succeed to launch in a very good conditions the North 3 Ouarzazate project, which is a 115 megawatt capacity with 8-hour storage, which means that after the sunset, we can continue producing electricity to fulfill the curve demand at a very good conditions. And right now we are almost at more than the half of the construction methodology path, and we should commission the project by the end of the next year. And this project comes after the NOR 1, Ouarzazate, which is already commissioned and functioning since last February. So with that, we are completing the NOR Ouarzazate complex, which is not far from here, and who will have a 518 megawatts of capacity. 17 from them are PV, and the rest is solar thermic. And on this solar complex, as you said, we are developing also an R&D platform where we try to test on an industrial pilot level the new solar technologies, to test them in terms of the way to optimize the construction schemes but also we test them in real condition production situation. And with that, I think we are very proud to say that we can share those elements. We can be associated to the other initiative. And I really believe that the renewable energy will give the good answer to the need of Africa in terms of electricity and energy in general. Because what we don't speak about it sufficiently is that with the renewable energy, it's not only matter of electricity. It could be matter of desalination of water. It could be a matter of producing steam for industrial process, producing coal for fisheries. The number of applications are amazingly very high. So with that, I believe that with your initiative, you can give to people the opportunity to go out from the poverty.
Thank you so much, Rubaid. You know, it's an incredible project, and it's also a beautiful project if you haven't seen pictures of it. And it's exciting to see you lead this large-scale solar. I think we also want to talk to some of the other challenges in financing. Obviously, financing something that big is challenging. But on the other end of the scale, it can be very challenging in Africa to finance small projects. And that is another thing that the industry needs. I wanted to turn to Mayank if we have a good connection, as Mayank has just an incredible story about his inspiration to start solar development in Tanzania, which I believe you're in a hot air balloon on your honeymoon. Mayank, could you tell us a little bit about Kigoma and how you've developed what is on the other end of the scale, 5 megawatts, and yet would be the first utility scale solar project in Tanzania? Mayank? Hold on. Mayank, we can't hear you. Hold on a second.
Hello?
Okay,
Can you hear me now? No.
No.
Testing, 1, 2,
Oh, yeah,
3.
there we go. We got you.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I apologize for not being there in person. I was really looking forward to meeting everybody at Marrakesh. But like you said, for us, Kigoma has been a lot of hard work. We spent about 4.5 years trying to perfect this business model, and our philosophy had always been to look at these defragmented, isolated mini grids, which are there in several sub-Saharan African nations like Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, etc. And we selected Kigoma. It's a small town on the border of Kigoma and DRC, on the banks of Lake Tanganyika, and we decided that it's currently, only supplied with power through diesel fuel, and even then, it is fairly, it's not reliable. They don't have enough power, and because of that, it obviously has huge impacts, whether for schools, for medical institutions, and what is really, really sad is that none of the local industries and things could actually develop because there was lack of power. So 5 years ago, we decided the strategy that let's see if we can bring in private capital and work with the government to see if we can actually set up a small 5 megawatt installation. And when I say it's small, it's obviously small as compared to the US and Europe, but our 5 megawatt installation in Kigoma produces power of about 8,500 megawatt hours of electricity per year, which is good enough for 48,000 people living in Kigoma. Of course, we're looking at creating approximately 125 odd jobs as a direct, directly from the project. But the whole purpose of this was to see if we could actually bring in large-scale photovoltaic of electricity and plug it into the existing legacy systems which are there in Africa, several countries in Africa, Tanzania being an example. So our philosophy has always been not to say that you replace your fossil fuels with or do away with biomass or hydro, but you know what? You got so much of electricity energy which is available through solar that why don't you bundle in and include that into the renewable energy mix? And that's what we've really been successful. It took us, like I said, about 4.5 years to actually do this, but we were very lucky. And I would say the big flip came to us about 2 years ago when we became a partner with the Power Africa initiative, and that really helped us open doors because it's not as we can share later. It's not the issues are not really as much finance or other related, but it's basically working with the governments, getting the approvals, and that's something which Power Africa really brought on, a lot of help for us. And of course, TDA, which I'm sure we'll talk about, how we are honored and actually, the help which we've got from TDA really pushed us through. So just want to quickly, let everybody know as of today, the construction has finally started. We're actually putting up the fence. The ground has been cleared. It's 25 acres of land. And we are committed to actually turning on the power plant on the 10th of April, 2017. So thanks, Lyda.
Thanks, Mayank. It is exciting, and it's just that sort of first step success that Power Africa and ASEF were designed to help along. Because it is, as Mayank has described, often a difficult road when you're the first one going down it. Nasi from South Africa, you've had a different challenge, and South Africa has a market that has been doing this, and through the REIPP, the REIPP, Renewable Energy Independent Power Program, has really structured the market in a way that a lot of people are looking to. Do you tell us a little bit about your project and how that came with the South African market structure?
Sure, thank you, Lyda. South Africa Energy is a small, privately owned South African company, and we saw an industry forming probably about 5 years ago. There was chatter in the market that private renewable energy would be allowed and a proper framework would be put together to integrate it into the system. We had a strong conviction around solar power, which had begun before the program was even announced, and we wanted to develop a project from which we would sell portions of the annual power to private companies that were looking for a green image. And so I think the government program came at an opportune time because we were at the beginning stages of developing that project, and this program came by and offered us an official platform to place our project within. The solar resource in South Africa is absolutely incredible, and our conviction was that we had to take advantage of it. So we definitely focused on solar power from day one. Within solar power, you have photovoltaics, you also have concentrated solar power. Our assumption was that as the market opened, photovoltaics would be the go-to option. It would be the easy one. Anyone with a piece of land and access to a solar panel supplier would immediately become a PV developer. But CSP was much more difficult, more expensive, more complex. And so we chose to take that path to minimize the competitive space. That was a very good decision that we made, and we're now on our second CSP project, which is very similar to Obaid's project as he describes it. I know we have 100 megawatts on the screen. That was the capacity that we applied for when we originally received the USTDA grant. And the structure of the program adjusted along the way. We were able to increase that to 150 megawatts. And as Obaid says, we received the same advice through the feasibility study that our USTDA grant provided. One of the first questions we asked was, what is the most appropriate solar power system considering our geography, the grid availability, the site that we had access to, the natural resources such as water in the area. And we were told that a molten salt central receiver project was absolutely the way to go. And that's the way we've proceeded. And so our project is called Sun Dry. It's a beautiful, beautiful machine. We're still in the development stages and yet to bid into a Department of Energy solicitation program, but we're very far along in the development. It's a tower in the center of a circular field of actuated mirrors. The tower is 250 meters tall, and the field of mirrors, the circle, has an area of 1,000 hectares. So it's a really big and interesting project, and we're very, very proud of it. I think more importantly, we're in a town in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. Once again, as I mentioned, the solar resource is incredible, but added to that, it's the largest province. It also has the smallest population. So all the land is privately owned, and the disruption is minimal. The population density on the site that we've selected is 1.8 people per square kilometer. So it's really opportune. And in that town as well, there are about 16,000 people and 26% unemployment. And this project will generate around 1,300 to 1,500 jobs across its 30-month construction period. So, I think South Africa, we've been fortunate to have a program that's developed into a very, very vibrant industry. But at the same time, developers like South Africa, which are small and remain private, are now competing in a hotly contested space. And as much as we may have some experience from earlier projects, as we embark on new initiatives, we have to convince investors to put capital up at risk and back us with the hopes of creating something that will someday give them a payback. And that's really not easy in South Africa nowadays. It's harder than it was 5 years ago when we first kicked off with projects. And that's why we're really, really grateful for the support that we've received from USTDA.
Thanks, Nazi. I think everyone who's familiar with the South African market can talk about or is aware of the success of the REIPP program. As you describe, it really does create bankable agreements, an understandable and clear road for the private sector, and it's brought in a ton of private sector interest. It hasn't, and I think the rest of Africa is looking at that as, is this a model we should follow? And so perhaps it's also useful to acknowledge that there have been some challenges as it's rolled out. Could you talk a little bit about that and how South Africa is overcoming those?
Yeah, so I think Mayank touched on it. If I speak to our original project in which we kicked off in 2010, we were first in the market, and there is no precedent for how developments should take place. So from our perspective, we were inexperienced and we were figuring this out as we went along. Unfortunately, the lawmakers were doing the same thing. What we didn't have in South Africa, and we still don't really have today, is a very well coordinated approach. So when you're doing large-scale power projects, you need the buy-in of your energy ministry, the national utility that will receive the power, the national treasury to provide a guarantee to the offtake to make it bankable. And in South Africa, they all kind of signed on to this program one by one. And then added to that, we had the environmental department, which was we relied on for permits. We had the water department, which we relied on for permits. And we, I don't want to say we blazed a trail, but we had to work with them one by one. Convince them that what we were trying to do was a good thing, that there was general government support for it, and that it was different to the power that they were used to. So all they knew up till that point in time was large-scale coal-fired power plants by the national utility. And every time we'd walk in the door, they would ask us what we were there for. The only word they hear is power or energy, and they apply the old large-scale coal rules to us. And that was difficult. How we overcome these issues, I want to just put this out, not really as encouragement or to make us sound like heroes, but it's a big privilege for a private company to be able to work on a project such as this. And as a developer, my job is to push through every single issue that happens. That is the job. if you ask me what I do today, it would be to deal with yesterday's issue. And at least once a week, I guarantee you, we lose our project in entirety. Massive red flag, and we have to save it. So in your respective countries, you'll find a lot of adversity as you move through. But there's effectively one goal, and it's to get that project constructed and to have power moving into whatever offtake system you're looking to contract with, and never give up. That's your one and only goal. Push through every single one of the issues, sit with the decision makers, help them work through the problems. Yeah, that's, I don't know if you're asking for advice, but I have to tell myself that every morning to keep going.
Thank you, Nasi. One thing that Nasi said as we were talking before this panel is, that it sometimes doesn't realize how much success you've had because you're so focused on all the challenges right in front of you. But it really is a tremendous road you've already come down. And looking at that, I think, is something that other developers can learn from. And by the same token, I wanted to go back to Mayank and say, you've found first round financing for what is a project that is, smaller than many banks and financiers will put on their books. What was that challenge like, and how did you succeed?
Sorry, Lyda, could you just repeat? I didn't hear your question.
Yes. So in terms of looking for financing for smaller projects, it's challenging. And how did you succeed against that?
Actually, that's a very good question, Lyda, because I kept hearing the other two panelists talking about challenges. And from a private sector perspective, especially looking at smaller projects, when I say smaller, I just want to make sure everybody understands. We're talking about, roughly $10 million is the size of the project. That, unfortunately, is so small that, larger development institutions like, say, IFC, et cetera, it's just too small for them. Unfortunately, it's fairly large for local banks in Tanzania, et cetera, to even look at project financing, primarily because they don't have access, they have not have enough project financing experience. We were fortunate enough to work with the Development Finance Institution of the U.S. government through Power Africa, OPIC, and they were actually, very early. They give us the full, commitment letter and approval letters, et cetera, for project financing. And of course, as we started working through the project, getting all the feasibility studies done, technical studies, et cetera, and then getting, let's say, what we call a fully baked, ready to fund project. And then that's where we started realizing the true challenges or hurdles from for a small project like ours for getting financing. Because even though the intent of everybody, whether it's the government of Tanzania, whether it's the development institutions, whether all of us in the room, etc., is to promote projects like ours, the issues come with at financing that there are 4 or let's say 5 major risks which are so critical that those really basically prevent any development institutions to actually go ahead and approve or go ahead and actually give us the long-term finance which we require. And to give you an idea what those 4 risks are, one, we're talking about country risk. They are looking at sovereign risk, political, currency, expropriation, and these things can happen because remember the revenue which we are for our projects like ours is based on a power purchase agreement which we sign with the government today, and we're assuming that the revenue stream will continue for the next 25 years. But the governments may change, the new governments may renege on the agreements which have been done previously, et cetera. So those are really big risks. And banks are extremely hesitant to get that kind of a risk, to take that risk. How did we take care of that? Well, we worked with the World Bank, WIMIGA, to get these risks actually covered. However, again, coming back to your question about the big risk of getting financing, is that projects like ours, there is a developer risk. Nobody's heard of next-gen solar before. the banks would say, what will happen? Suppose, we give you guys the $10 million and you just disappear. What about the technology? It's never been done before. You're using, EPC contractors who've probably never worked in that country. Then there are the host of financial risks. You're borrowing in hard currency, US dollars. Your payment streams are all in Tanzanian shillings. And then, of course, the greatest risk which prevents financing, to us is that even though you've got all these risks covered, you've got all the feasibility studies and things done, but unfortunately, you're selling to an off-taker which is bankrupt. In fact, most of the utilities in Africa, do not have a creditworthiness to actually guarantee that they will be able to honor your obligations, even if for a small project like ours. I'm not even talking about the big projects which the other developers on the stage are talking about. 5 megawatts, will they be able to pay? So with all this, Lida, unfortunately, it took us, I would say, probably between 18 to 24 months trying to get a loan approved, which we were not able to do through the regular institutions which we had been working on. And we had to actually go out to a fairly creative solution, which was, let's get a short-term construction loan in place, use that to build the plant, start construction. That would demonstrate that there is no project risk, there's no technology risk, there is no agreement risk, there is no government risk. We will get this up, let the project go live, and then we will work with the development institutions, the traditional development institutions, to say, look, now that we've done all this, let's refinance that to a long-term, 15, 16, 17-year loan, so that at least they don't have the project risk, the country risk, the technology risk, the environment, all that out. And that's what we have learned. Our only learning, or if we had to do this again, we would only request that, I wish we had learned this maybe 2 years ago and saved those 2 years' time. But definitely our second, third, and fourth project, now we know how to move forward with. So that's our, the new model which we're working on. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayank. I wish you could see the audience. I see some heads nodding out there as you talk about the risk and talk about what creativity and perseverance you put into finding a solution. And it is exciting to see that there are tools that can bring financing in, even if it is a step-by-step and stage-by-stage process at which you reduce risk and then reduce the cost of that financing. Before I open it up to the audience for questions, I wanted to turn back to Mazen, to Obaid again, to talk about something that you recently announced, which is pretty exciting. We've heard projects that we're working with around the continent talk about the idea of project bonds, talk about some new ways to bring financing in. And that's something in the green bond that you've just put out in the press. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, of course. Just perhaps to say that these projects are not easy. I totally share the points that were just mentioned right now. You should be inspired to go every day to the goal. The financing of those kind of projects are not easy. As I said, they are highly capitalistic, and the burden of the interest rate of the debt has a high level of impact on the price of the electricity. So the first issue, as I said, you should make the good investment in the size of the technology. The second level of leverage is to optimize the financing. So the optimization of the financing, you should have first to go to the project, a customer in front of you, a good customer, to convince the financial sector that you have a good project. Then it supposes that you have a good financial market in your country, which is not easy in Africa, because those projects need long-term financing to amortize the project. We have succeeded to make in Norway that one. We have mobilized soft loans from IFIs, which are first climate funds, if you want, that make a high impact on the cost of LCOE we get from this project, because we are the sponsor of the project, but we have played also the role of the lender to the project. So, which means that the financing is a big issue for those kind of investments. It is very difficult to foresee that all the African countries can make an open market financing for those projects, because you have first industrial risks. You need to enhance the awareness, as it has been said, to the financial sector about those kind of technologies. You need also to have a deep financial market that make possible to the banking to give you long-run investment tenor. Otherwise, it will become very, very high, and you cannot anticipate this project. So I think this is our more or less some prerequisites to succeed financing those projects. Hopefully here in Morocco, we have started our financial sector reform several decades before, and we succeeded to have a stock of exchange, market for papers, for bonds, and so on. And in this context, we hopefully succeed to close some days ago, at first time, bonds that are dedicated to green power, and we succeed to certify them as a green bonds. It is about $1 billion that should be closed in the next, before the end of this year. So, and we are very proud of that. It's not easy. There are a lot of prerequisites, but we still, I think, in the field of renewable energy, need to have some innovation also in the schemes of financing. I think it's one of the biggest issues to make possible and feasible renewable energy project in Africa.
Thank you, Abid. I now want to take questions from the audience. If there are, we've got developers here from every corner of Africa and different size projects. Are there questions that people have about financing tools or about these projects in general?
So go ahead and just raise your hand if you have a question, and maybe we'll take two at a time. Also, hashtag AskUSCenter if you're watching online, so we can take your questions as well. Get those in at hashtag AskUSCenter on Twitter. Okay, I have this gentleman here, and then any other questions? I'll take two.
Thank you. My name is Faris Hassan. I'm from the OPIC Fund for International Development, and our priority is energy access in Africa. And we do the energy access and financing projects in two tiers. One is the big projects, which you mentioned. The other is the Mayank model, which is the 5 megawatt, 3 megawatt, and the mini grids. In both cases, financing is related to the ability of repayment. And this is the issue that most lenders would concentrate on. So if any developer would like to have a finance, I think the first thing that they have to do is convince that they have a good business model, that their consumers are ready to pay back. Because what we heard from Minac as well, that you are having a purchase power agreement with a utility which is already bust or financially not viable. So this is curbing financing to Africa. And if we can guarantee a business model that ensures this, I think we can go forward. But my question is to Mayank, do you think more financing should go to smaller projects or to bigger projects? Maybe the other members of the panel also share the question. Thank you.
Okay, and before we answer that question, let me just make sure if there's one more question, we can be efficient and take them both at the same time. Okay, go ahead, panelists.
Mayank?
Sorry, Lyda, could you just repeat that question? I mean, there was a lot of echo.
Yes. So his question was, what do you think more financing should go to, larger projects or smaller projects?
It's actually based on what we are seeing in Africa. I don't think it's an either or. Given the levels of electrification in these countries, they need both. But our experience has shown that smaller projects like say 5-10 megawatts, which are typically displacing diesel, it's probably easier to get financing, primarily because if the utility, which is in a poor credit situation, whether for a small or a large project, but for a small project, since most of it is the electricity is being generated through diesel fuel, the cost of generation is almost twice that of what they would be paying, let's say a solar or a small utility or power plants like us. So the issue is, if they don't pay us, to generate the same amount of electricity, they have to actually incur twice the cost. And it's not just cost angle, as the TANESCO, which is the utility in Tanzania, keeps telling us. It's the whole logistic issue. Small town like Kigoma consumes 28,000 liters of diesel every day. So imagine how much of diesel has to be shipped all the way from Dar es Salaam, which is the port, or right across the country to Kigoma. It's not just shipping and logistics of shipping the fuel. It's storage, pilferage. There's a host of things which the utilities right now has to take care of. So they actually are encouraging developers like us to say, please come and set up different locations, because it'll take away the headache of operating these grids through diesel. And because of that, we feel that obviously the incentive to pay is obviously much higher. But it's not just based on the cost differential that development institutions like OPEC or IFC, etc., would be happy. So we actually had to resort to the Africa Trade Insurance Group, which has been set up by 7 or 8 different countries in Africa. The governments have actually got together to say, what can we do to encourage private sector investments into industries like power and others, and take away the risk of non-payment. So we've taken an insurance policy against non-payment by the utility through the African Trade Insurance. So that's one of the other advantages.
Great, thank you. Okay, I see another question here, and then one over there, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up.
Hi, my name is Ricardo Noguera, and I'm with the U.S. State Department, and this question is directed to Nazi. I see the technology you're using is pretty novel. When you're looking to get finance, how much of an issue is the novelness of the technology in terms of finding folks interested in providing finance?
Just 1 second. We actually have 2 more questions, so we'll take them all at once.
Abdullah from the Green Building Council. I have related to the question for small or large size. In the more developed countries, there are issues now with the stability of the grid when we add a lot of renewable energy. And since we're starting from a clean slate, let's say in Africa, would it be more conducive to look at distributed energy rather than mega scale projects, so decentralization? This way we're moving forward into a grid that is more steady for the future. Thanks.
Okay, and one last question.
Thank you. I'm Wiley Rhodes, and my question is, does the TSTDA support projects outside of solar, specifically gas to power or flare to power projects in Nigeria?
I'll start with the easy one. Yes, we do. I think gas is around 20% of our portfolio, and we do have some active projects in Nigeria. So happy to happy to talk to anyone about that. We have what I like to call a rolling admissions policy. We're always happy to talk to developers or project sponsors about new ideas. But in terms of the other two questions, I'll turn to our panelists. Nadia, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the second question because it follows on from the previous discussion. And just to add to what Mayank said, I think in developed nations, when you do renewables, you're trying to clean up the energy mix, and it would be a case of replacing what previously was dirty. On the African continent, we're dealing with a different issue, which is providing power in places where it wasn't before. And so our issue is always about needing to add more power to the grid, whether it's large power or small power. And depending on what country you're in or what problem you're trying to solve, the need may be for a large plant that has perhaps a storage capability and can stabilize the grid. And then the need may also be for a small plant because it's servicing a much more remote area. And so there cannot be a focus on small or large investments. We definitely need both, and the specific case will tell you what it should be. On that second question, you're absolutely right. Renewables are intermittent by nature. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and the on and off nature of those plants can destabilize a grid. There are studies that say that a national grid should not hold more than 10% of intermittent sources in order for it to be stable. Again, then we go back to the specific application. So if we're looking at South Africa, we already have a fairly well-developed grid that has a lot of coal power onto it. When we add renewables to it, we need to keep in mind this 10% level. When you're looking at a country or a region that does not have power at all, I would absolutely say that a decentralized or microgrid is the solution for that area. It's the right solution because you're not going to get the national utility to drag out new lines to that area, so you can cross off the nationally provided power option, and you therefore have to go with purely solving the need of that off-taker. On to your question, sir, about the novelness of technology, it's absolutely an issue for us. When we did our first project in 2010, we wanted to do one of these fancy towers. We went out to the banks and were very quickly told that that would not be supported. It was way too novel. There were not enough operational examples in the world. And because it was the first round of our procurement program, they wanted us to go with someone with a technology that was really well proven. We also had to bring in contractors that had done this before, which meant we couldn't use South African companies to build these projects. Those were the rules. And so we always had our eye on something a little bit more sophisticated for later rounds, and we're fortunate that we get to do this now. One specific example there, Abengoa is a very large international solar power provider. They developed their own technology. They took a very big risk several years ago in doing a central receiver tower project. It wasn't molten salt. They had to leverage a lot of their balance sheet in order to push that project forward at the time. And only once it was into its construction phase could they refinance it to more commercial finance. Because they laid the path for us 2-3 years ago, a small private company is now able to approach financiers with that very same technology.
Okay, and did we have the gentleman in the back had a comment really quickly?
Vivek Mittal from Africa Renewable Energy Initiative. I'll comment on a comment made by Mr. Bhargav a short while back. Small projects are absolutely the way to go, but they won't get finance if you do them on a project finance solution, which is really meant for large projects. And to his point about offsetting diesel and kerosene, we have to kick the ball out at a continental level. And that calculations are that $25 billion goes to backup power and off-grid power in diesel spend every year. So if that were to offset next 10 years, that's about $250 to $300 billion saved across offset against the continent. Now that's a lot of capital. Regardless of what the utility credits are, you can actually do a lot of good things with that kind of cash flow. So there are solutions, but it means we, as in the developers, the countries at a continental level, the donors all need to get their act together and work on what is actually a continental-wide problem, as opposed to country by country or village by village. So that's the comment.
Fantastic. Any closing remarks by Lyda or our presenters?
Perhaps one word about financing. We need huge amount of financing, either for large-scale projects and small projects. What we need is specified financing, dedicated financing, and adapted financing to the projects.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to our audience and to our presenters who came from all over Africa and to talk to us about the challenges. It's not easy being the first one down that road, but it's good to see that with some assistance and with a lot of perseverance you can get there, and I hope that your success is just the first of much more that we'll be seeing. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Lyda. Thank you, Andy, as well.